Good morning. This is Mark of the Wicked Edge Expert Corner Group, and today we're going to get whetstoned. We talked about stones, sharpening stones as a precursor, all the different options. My thing is whetstones. I use whetstones made for Wicked Edge guided sharpeners. I'm a guided knife sharpener. There's not a whole lot of difference between the guided sharpeners. I happen to prefer Wicked Edge, but there's really no difference between Wicked Edge and the other guided sharpening systems. They all share the same challenges of clamping a knife in a fixed position so we can set the angle on guide rods to sharpen the edge of that knife at that predetermined angle. My choice is Wicked Edge, clamps my knives vertically, allows me to sharpen both sides. The other sharpeners, like I'm going to use this one, like the Edge Pro or the Hapstone or TS Pro, they use a horizontal clamp. And they have additional clamps that some of them are multiple, some of them are single. And they use a single guide rod that comes from the center. So the challenge is the same, the clamping, the positioning, the sweet spot, the angle. They all have the same limitations. And they all work on the same geometry, trigonometry, and the Pythagorean theorem. So the guided sharpeners are, within nuance, they're essentially the same. They all have the same challenges. We all look, guided sharpener users, we all look to accessorize them and to do things to expand their effectiveness. I've done the same thing with my Wicked Edge setups. Now I want to talk about whetstones. Whetstones are, let me see what I got here. Whetstones are ceramic stones, and they are made to be used either wet, as in soaked, which is the term for a water stone. I will use that term water stone, meaning a stone that is actually soaked underwater. Water stones may be even stored underwater and kept in a wet bath and then taken out when you use it and put it back in the wet bath. Whetstones, some of them you soak, you use them, and then you let them dry, and when you use them again, you soak them to get them saturated. Others take a quick soak. Still others are splash and go or spritz and go that you just mist water on them. So there's a variety of whetstones today, from the original or traditional whetstones, where the basic muddy ceramic stones, and they're sacrificial. As you use them, the stones wear away, but the mud and the abrasives mixed in that cake that we're rubbing our knives against. This is an old king waterstone that does get saturated in the water, does get put underwater, and it is used like that. These stones, these different whetstones, stonemakers happen to be the sharpener makers also, but stonemakers like Gritomatic, like Genda, I don't know, I'm trying to think of whetstone makers. It's a limited group that are making it, and what they're doing is they're taking water stones, traditional whetstones, new style whetstones, and they're cutting them up if they can, because not all of them can be cut, but they're cutting them up if they can, and they're mounting them in a size that's conducive with the different guided sharpeners. The whetstones for Wicked Edge are 5.5 by 3/4 of an inch. But there are whetstones that are in the 1 by 6 plated format. all of these whetstones started as a full-size stone that somebody took and cut them up. And then they have to get backed. These are the 1x6 format. These are made by Genda. And Genda backs his with stainless steel to keep them from flexing. Because on the 1x6 sharpeners like the TS Pro that or the Edge Pro, that the pointed plates are held in a holder and they're used like this against the surface because the pressure on the center, it's held from the ends. If this plate was something that was flexible, even thin aluminum, these stones could break. And they will break. So the stones have to be backed. Some people choose to back them just by mounting them in a handle because the handle makes contact with the stones. I can't tell you how that'll work. I've only used stones made by makers that actually laminate them. Here's a stone. This happens to be a Shapton glass whetstone that was cut to size by Genda, and they are laminated. They are backed on aluminum plate. And then this aluminum plate backed whetstone for my situation is mounted on a wicked edge style handle, one on either side, and then you have two grits. Whetstones are hard to buy. Whetstones are, they're not hard to buy. They're hard to know what you're buying when you're new at it. If you look in the catalogs, whether it be Gritomatic, I'm using these for example because I know they sell whetstones. If you use Gritomatic whetstones or you use Genda's whetstones, they are full-size proprietary whetstones that have been cut and backed and mounted or cut and plated. Here the backing and the plate is the same. You wouldn't need to put a backing plate on here if you're going to mount it on this 1x6 plate, as opposed to these need to be backed. All of these are stones that are procured and then cut, backed, and mounted for use with the guided sharpening systems in the formats. There are the 1x4 format. These are universal handles that hold a whetstone or other stones in the 1x4 plated format. This is for wicked edge users. Here's a 1x6 format, uses these plated 1x6, the same stone that is usable with the Hapstone, Edge Pro, Apex, TS Prof, Gritomatic sharpeners. All of them that use the 1x6 plated can use any of these whetstones. The whetstones that I've chosen to buy because I'm in the American market, I shop things online for the information. So I shop stores like Sharpening Supply, or I shop sharpening supplies at Mark Richmond's Chef Knives to Go, because he's into knife sharpening somewhat, so he has some sharpening stones. And then you have to get whetstones that you can cut, and whetstones that you can plate, and whetstones that you can mount. And thus, this collection I'm showing you over my shoulder of whetstones that I've created because I want to compare them. I want to understand which whetstone with which abrasive, which type of whetstone works best with which steel. See, I'm trying to sharpen, my thing is Japanese chef knives, and I'm trying to sharpen them on a fixed angle wicked edge system. So I'm trying to learn how to sharpen a knife that's traditionally sharpened on a traditional flat stone handheld. I'm trying to learn how to sharpen those knives in a fixed angle system like a wicked edge, where I clamp the knife in a position, and now I have to figure out how to use whetstones across that clamped fixed position using the guide rods, which are fixed. You can only slide up and down or go rotate sideways. So it's a challenge to learn how to sharpen a knife placed in a fixed position, to sharpen it from tip to heel and cover it and do it well. I use whetstones, I use wicked edge. That is this guided system that I found that I can work with, and I've been using it for my entire sharpening career, and I've expanded my collection of whetstones. So to give you a little introduction on the whetstones, I'm going to stop here and then I'm going to get into specific whetstones, and we're going to go from there.